Celeste, released early in 2018 by indie studio MaddyMakesGames, has cemented itself as one of the most widely acclaimed precision platformers ever made. Between critical fanfare, plentiful awards, the much coveted overwhelmingly positive review status on Steam, and physical re-releases spanning far beyond its initial release, it's no overstatement to say that this game has captured the collective hearts and broken the collective thumbs of gamers far and wide. And, spoiler alert, the game really is that great. However, while audiences and critics alike were completely correct in identifying certain elements of this game, such as the emotionally rich, character-driven plot, as breakthrough moments for MaddyMakesGames, the under-discussed reality here is that the foundational core of Celeste's gameplay, that being tough-as-nails single-screen platforming centered around the management of a unique double jump, had long been the calling card of the creative mastermind behind the game, Maddy Thorson. And one series of games in particular runs rampant through Celeste's DNA. So much so that, as a longtime fan of Maddy's work, it's hard for me to view Celeste as anything short of a straight-up spiritual successor to it. So, yeah, we need to talk about Jumper. On February 11th, 2004, Maddy released the original Jumper as a free download on ExtremelyOKGames, a now-defunct web portal that was meant to host user-developed games, specifically ones made in the GameMaker engine. GameMaker, as a tool, would later go on to give us indie staples like Hotline Miami, Undertale, Hyper Light Drifter, and many, many more. Nowadays, independent games are hardly a foreign concept to anyone, but keep in mind that with Jumper, this was 2004. Early 2004. 10 months before the original release of Cave Story 2004, and many years before the term indie game would even pop up on the radar of the wider gaming public. So, with that context in mind, what exactly is Jumper? It's the story of the ultimate soldier, a terror beyond imagination, Ogmo. An abandoned World War I-era lab experiment, now awakened and determined to escape captivity, it's up to you to guide Ogmo through 42 stages of absurdist one-hit kill hazards in pursuit of his freedom. The game starts off deceptively simple. Movement, a jump, and a single mid-air double jump are all that Ogmo has at his disposal for this first adventure. But the game's complexity comes from the precise way that the level design demands the player to time their mid-air jumps to avoid hazards. Ogmo's double jump has a fixed height, so once you press that up key mid-air, you're committed, making clipping into overhead hazards with the too early double jump just as frequent as falling onto obstacles below. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Jump through stage 1, double jump through stage 2, and stage 3 introduces the golden arrow, which, as the helpful tip at the top of the screen explains, refreshes your ability to double jump when grabbed. This single element is crucial to a ton of the game's levels, transforming Ogmo from a spinning red box thing into a soaring, majestic spinning red box thing, as you chain multiple mid-air jumps in succession to accomplish death-defying feats. And just in case you weren't drawing the parallels on your own at this point, the golden arrows would be almost directly translated into the green dash replenishing crystals in Celeste, operating in exactly the same way. But back to Jumper. Stage 4 introduces moving platforms, a platforming staple which are admittedly a little finicky in this game. And Stage 5 introduces blue blocks that fall a second or so after Ogmo stands on them. These are later used in more creative ways, with blocks potentially blocking a player's path if they fall, requiring you to avoid standing on them entirely, or sometimes in the opposite way, where falling blocks are necessary to cover up spiky paths and create a walkable ground for the player. Stage 6 introduces the green super jump pad, which instantly sends Ogmo flying upwards when he lands on top of it. While not an entirely novel concept in the platforming genre, the super jump pad also returns in Celeste. Stage 7 introduces both spikes and yellow electric bolts that will spell instant death for Ogmo upon contact, and with those successfully avoided, we've defeated Sector 1. The game is split into 7 sectors, and players are rewarded for beating a sector with this cute little stat screen showing them how many deaths they've accrued to each hazard type throughout. Sector 2 ups the ante and is the point in the game where its true genius starts to shine through, throwing the established hazards at players in ways that thoughtfully teach them to take full advantage of Ogmo's limited moveset. It may seem really quaint, but it just feels so good to weave Ogmo through these obstacle courses, whether falling through a tight corridor laced with electrical dangers, or carefully placing your mid-air jumps to just barely grab that next golden arrow. It's an early testament to one of Maddy's greatest strengths as a platform game developer: level design. The delicate ballet between the player character's abilities and the environments they're asked to navigate through using them is at the heart of all precision platform design, and this is the part that Jumper knocks totally out of the park. It's a brutal brutally difficult game that demands a lot out of you as the player, but it never feels unfair or punishing or just straight up stupid. The cute little death animation and really satisfying sound it makes when Ogmo is brutally killed also go a long way. I mean, listen to that. And, well, okay, on the topic of sound, there is one genuinely unfair problem with the game, and it's kind of notorious. Watch this. You see how the game just froze for a second? When the music track restarts, the game actually freezes up for a split second. Yeah, seriously. Now, this has something to do with the fact that the game was made in an early version of GameMaker, and as an amateur GameMaker dev myself, I can definitely attest that even today, GameMaker is not really the best when it comes to handling audio. But if you just go into the game knowing and accepting that this freeze will inevitably mess up your timing and get you killed at least once, it's really something I think most people will be able to forgive. Now, there are also a variety of other game mechanics that slowly get introduced to the game throughout. Sector 2.5 introduces us to switches that allow Ogmo to turn the electricity off, or even back on again if need be. Sometimes switches will also affect the closing and opening of electrical doors, or the movement of moving platforms. It adds a little bit of puzzle-style thinking to an otherwise action-heavy experience. Also in this vein are pushable crates, introduced in Sector 3.3, which can be used to hold down buttons found on the floor, also in service of opening doors and such. Moving fireball hazards pop up later in Sector 4, as does the ghost block, which is an infrequently used mechanic where this transparent block mirrors all of the player's actions, and you have to use him cleverly to make a path for the real Ogmo to progress. And while it obviously serves a much larger narrative purpose in that game and doesn't function like this precisely, I can't help but feel like this ever so slightly foreshadows the Madeline shadow self dynamic that we would find later in Celeste. Speaking of which, remember these red bubble launchers that shoot you in whichever cardinal direction you input? They're here in Jumper as well, except in the form of these launcher boxes. These will just idly point in different directions for as long as you sit inside of them, triggering only manually after the press of the jump button. These are kind of a callback to Donkey Kong Country's barrels as well, and just like in that game, they're a lot of fun here. I kind of think there's something inherently satisfying about seeing your character launched impossible distances through the air in a game where gravity serves as your primary obstacle. Sector 5 gives us white blocks that follow your movement perfectly, serving as either a helpful floor or an annoying blockade, depending on the context, as well as cannons with bounce-onable cannonballs ripped straight out of Mario 3. The game is really in full swing difficulty-wise by this point, but to add insult to injury, Sector 6 introduces the Black Star, which will remove your ability to double jump entirely, at least until you subsequently collect a yellow star to regain it. And at risk of sounding like a broken record, we again see early traces of Celeste in this, with the late stages of that game also starting to toy around with exactly how many mid-air jumps were afforded to the player at any given time. It's just something to keep in mind. Now, Sector 6 is the final stretch of Ogmo's escape from the lab, and if you manage to complete it, you're rewarded with another cutscene. But unfortunately, Ogmo is recaptured after a fake ending, and is being transported to the National Science Institute. Ogmo, of course, wants nothing to do with this, and so you'll have to escape the plane you're being hauled away on. Sector 7, the final sector of the game, actually feels kind of genius, even just in its presentation alone. While it's a really small touch in the grander scheme of things, Sector 7 takes place in front of an open sky, complete with moving clouds, and for the first time in the game, scrolling. After 6 sectors, and on a first playthrough, probably hours of game time confined to stuffy indoor lab environments, the open-air, free-scrolling nature of 7.1 actually does a great job of creating a sense of grandiosity out of very little. It's super memorable, and honestly, it gets me excited every time I get to this part of the game. The genius is in the details, people. The last new gameplay element is introduced, a simple iteration of the super jump pad, but this time one that breaks after a single use. Grind your way through this final set of challenges, and when you arrive at Sector 7.5, the final level, you should be well prepared for the ultimate showdown. A green plane or something? Wait, I thought we were on a plane already. Look, I don't know. But this last level is pretty cool nonetheless. To contrast the first level of this sector, it's a vertical scroller instead of a horizontal one, and the frantic race to keep up with the screen without getting creamed by the plane spaceship thing is really satisfying as a climax. When you reach the top, the green plane thing commits seppuku in an act of lol-so-random style justice, appropriate for the era. Ogmo escapes, you can review your total death count, and if you're anything like me, immediately go searching for the sequel. But wait, not so fast. Jumper Redux was released just under a year later, and it not only includes the original campaign retouched with a brand new coat of paint, but includes an entire second campaign aimed at players who had mastered the first game already. Yeah, this is basically the Lost Levels of the Jumper series. It's brutally hard, and I'm not going to go over this campaign in full detail, but it definitely makes Jumper Redux a must-play. It even features an option for hosting multiplayer sessions, complete with nicknames and a chat function where you can choose a segment of the game to race through alongside other people. I think this was meant to do over local computer networks, probably in an office or school setting or something. Multiplayer doesn't usually appeal too much to me, given that it necessitates human interaction, and I can't really see anything like this getting much use nowadays, but it's really interesting and commendable to see something like this included. And even more impressive is the full-on Jumper Editor, a tile-based level editor for the game. Not only can you place all of the familiar objects from Jumper to create unique stages, complete with background changes, different skins for Ogmo, and music selection, but there's even some all-new items and scenery that never appeared in the base game at all. The most substantial are fireball cannons that are basically just cannons, but without the bounceability of the cannonballs, moving versions of the golden arrows, and gravity increaser and decreaser items that do exactly what the names say. You can even alter the game's baseline level of gravity for some wild possibilities. Maddy's dedication to and belief in not only her own creativity, but also the creative potential of others really shines through here. Can you believe it only gets better? Now look, I don't mean to be overdramatic, but Jumper 2 is a revelation. It takes the solid foundations of all the things that made the first game unexpectedly clever and builds upon them in just the right ways. On the presentational side, the graphics and sound have been upped just enough. The game still perfectly lingers in the realm of DIY charm, but in this one it feels more like an intentionally simple style rather than just some kind of limitation that you have to look past. And where it really matters, the gameplay, Ogmo is rocking a sweet new set of moves. First up, Ogmo can now wall jump. Wall jumps are infinite, assuming you can make contact with a wall, and they send you on a slightly different trajectory than a standard jump or double jump. They can also be chained together to scale vertical sections of levels given the right circumstances. His basic movement feels slightly different, with the addition of a little bit of traction, so you might be thrown off at the very beginning, but stick with it. Given his new movement, he can perform a skid jump if the player changes directions quickly and then jumps. Think Mario 64. You'll see Ogmo kick up some dirt when he initially skids, letting you know the maneuver can be performed, and skid jumps are significantly higher than standard grounded jumps, making them vital to master. In fact, the very first level of the game makes sure you know how to use both this and the new wall jump, given that your chances of success are zilch if you don't fully master both of these. Ogmo's final new technique is the ability to duck. Well, that's lame, but not really, because in conjunction with icy floors or conveyor belts, this will allow him to slide into small passages or beneath otherwise deadly obstacles, and there's even a new type of button that lets you manually press it via the ducking feature. That's oddly satisfying. Beyond Ogmo's moveset itself, this time around you'll immediately notice a blue gem in every level, and these are, who would have guessed it, the equivalent of the optional strawberries in Celeste. Although, whereas in that game you merely had to get back to safety to permanently bank a strawberry, levels have to be completed in full after collecting gems to bank them for good. If you can manage to collect enough gems, usually placed in out-of-the-way, riskier areas, you'll unlock tons of cool stuff on the unlockables menu. Skins for Ogmo, fun game modifiers, a jump counter to keep track of your, well, jumps, and even an awesome assortment of art related to the game, including links to 2 desktop wallpapers, which nowadays are just shortcuts to 404 web pages. But still, you get the idea. And speaking of the unlockables menu generally, yeah, there's actually a competent menu system in this game. 3 save files, a level select screen to replay beaten stages, a persistent tracker of your game completion percentage, gem count, death count, buttons that let you replay cutscenes, and the aforementioned unlockables menu, of course. On the topic of cutscenes, Ogmo apparently jumped out of the plane at the end of the first Jumper. It is what he does best after all. The opening cutscene of Jumper 2 picks up immediately from this point, which is a really cool touch. I know the story is silly in these games, but even just minor attention to detail with stuff like this creates a sense of persistence that raises your overall investment in the game's events. After Ogmo tumbles from the plane, he dashes off a nearby cliff and falls directly into the first level of Jumper 2. Ogmo's goal is still merely to escape his pursuers, and this time you're looking at 50 standard stages, split into 10 sectors, with 10 bonus stages waiting for you if you manage to shave down your overall completion time enough to unlock them. As far as other new gameplay features, outside of the hint boxes that replace the omnipresent hints from the first game, Stage 1-3 introduces our first real new element, icy floors, which Ogmo will, of course, slide along as if his stubby little feet were sticks of butter. It's fun, stressful, and again, a platforming staple. Other than that, Sector 1, the Temple, mostly serves to refamiliarize players with the returning basics of gameplay. Basic movement, falling blocks, moving platforms, and super jump pads. Clear the 5 stages and we enter Sector 2, the Jungle. This starts to show off the increase in visual variety this time around. The lush jungle levels reintroduce switches, pushable crates, pressure-sensitive buttons, and introduce icy walls to match the icy floors, which can't be wall jumped upon. Makes sense. 2-4 hits us with our biggest surprise yet. A pink Ogmo? Bruh. Give chase through the next 2 levels and clear the sector, and surprise surprise, a cutscene. There are a lot more of these in Jumper 2, and it's a great payoff for your progression. They're still simplistic and maybe even crude by some people's standards, but I don't know, I love this stuff. It reminds me exactly of the comics and characters I would draw while I probably should have been paying attention in class. That nostalgic familiarity as a fellow creative is something that the entire Jumper series really evokes in me. But let's stay on topic here. Ogmo chases the pink Ogmo out of the jungle, only to find a white Ogmo as well. It turns out the Ogmo we play as wasn't the only hideous experiment to escape from the lab. Princess is the pink one, Upside is the white one, and the 3 are confronted by the Conductor, a cartoonish villain of sorts. This guy kinda rules. His dialogue just reeks of goofy Invader Zim style humor, and again, it takes me back to simpler times. He tells the group there's a price on Ogmo's head, and he intends to collect it. So he kidnaps Ogmo, and he'll return later for the other 2? It seems suspicious, but it's probably nothing, right? Sector 3 appropriately sees us aboard the Conductor's train, hence his name, in a sequence reminiscent of Jumper 1's plane section. One detail I love about this sector is that when you die, you see Ogmo's lifeless body get left behind by the moving train. I just love it. There's nothing much in terms of new gameplay elements in this sector, just a nice ramp up in difficulty, that is, until we reach the first boss fight of the game on the 5th stage. The Conductor will constantly lob blasts of energy your way, and you have to dodge them, and bonk them on the head using these falling blocks. This is hard as hell, but it's a really cute way to incorporate a boss encounter into the game without really altering the gameplay style that much. It's clever stuff. Send the Conductor packing, and our next cutscene is hilarious. The train just crashes into a giant rock that it was already headed towards anyway, I guess, and Ogmo goes flying out. Sector 4 is the Dream, taking place in a trippy world of purple. Presumably Ogmo is unconscious from his fall out of the train. It's all really simple, Looney Tunes-esque stuff as far as the plot goes, but it does such a great job at introducing variety, something that the first game kind of lacked until its very last leg. In this sector, black and yellow stars make their return, as well as launcher boxes, and a few new mechanics are introduced as well. TNT boxes are the same as regular pushable crates, except they explode when pushed off of a ledge, destroying a block or 2 and clearing the way. But even more interesting are the breakable red wall tiles, which will crumble once Ogmo has wall jumped off of them. These are a really flexible stage element that get a lot of mileage throughout the rest of the game. They're like the wall jump equivalent of a falling block, more or less. And lastly, those new buttons I mentioned a while back, that you actually have to duck on top of to press, these usually let you toggle between red and blue, with the corresponding stage elements fading in or out of existence depending on which mode you toggle to. Sort of self-explanatory. None of these simple game mechanics are really that revolutionary on their own, but as tools for Maddy to express her mastery of level design, they become so much more meaningful. Clear the sector, and we see that there's a mysterious character merely called the Boss pulling the strings. We get the reveal that Princess and Upside were actually employees of the Boss sent to deceive Ogmo, and the overeager Conductor messed up the plan by kidnapping Ogmo prematurely. The Boss orders something called Ghostbot to be sent in pursuit of our boxy red hero, foreshadowing trouble to come. Sector 5 sees Ogmo awakening from his dream, stranded in the caves, with a few challenges that place an emphasis on the usage of skid jumps, followed by the reintroduction of the white follower blocks, as well as a new spiked variant that behaves the same but kills Ogmo on contact. The one-time use variant of the super jump pad also returns, with the sector's final stage being an epic climax, a horizontally scrolling chase sequence with the Ghostbot himself. He bursts through the ceiling like a lunatic and chases you down the tight hallway alongside a giant wheel of spiky death. If you manage to endure the obstacle course that awaits, Ogmo will ultimately be cornered in a dead end and captured by Ghostbot. The boss is pleased to know that Ogmo is back in captivity and that the halls have indeed been filled with a series of nonsensical, lethal, but vaguely passable obstacles. Just our luck. And we also learn the motivation behind all of this evil scheming. Ogmo, being the ultimate soldier and all, is going to be used to model an army of robots after. That can't be good. Of course, Sector 6 sees Ogmo escaping from the robot factory. Simply slip through this conveniently placed passageway and we're good to go. Here we first encounter conveyor belts, putting our ducking skills to the test. And in the next room, inactive robot Ogmo bodies in mid-production on an assembly line. Hitch a ride on their heads, and away we go. 6-3 sees the Ogmo robots being given their fake Ogmo faces, a really cute touch, with 6-4 continuing the gag with a shiny new coat of red paint for each one. Make it to 6-5, and you can blast your way into the boss's office with some TNT crates, where he's waiting for us. He bloviates humorously for a bit, but when he tries to show off the power of his new Ogmobot army, they just shuffle around incoherently. He realizes that his scientist research isn't yet up to snuff, has the Ogmobots thrown in the ocean, and the real Ogmo fired out of a cannon. Specifically in a random direction. Moments later, the scientists report a breakthrough in their research, and the pursuit begins again. Ogmo lands on a beautiful snowy mountain for Sector 7, and the falling snowflakes don't only look nice, they provide a useful visual indicator for this sector's unique gimmick, intermittent bursts of wind that push Ogmo towards the left side of the screen. Dealing with this can be really tricky, but it's a highlight of the game for how memorable it is, and it stands alone as one of the only environmental gimmicks of this nature in the entire series. Oh, and remember our premise now. Climbing a snowy, desolate mountain? Ringing any bells? This sector has Celeste written all over it, but let's not stress the point. We're reintroduced to our old friends, the Cannons, and a few precarious platforming challenges later, we see Ogmo recaptured by Ghostbot once more, and taken to a familiar lab. And yeah, Sector 8 is straight up Jumper 1 throwback territory. Yes! The sweet, sweet establishment of continuity. It's great. While there's nothing new in terms of gameplay mechanics here, we do get to revisit some of the most notorious level concepts from the first game in all of their slightly updated glory, and it's sick. Escape the lab, and it's on to Sector 9, the tower, complete with gloomy raindrops. The first level has a really cool gimmick. Ghostbot is asleep, and if you land from the air directly onto any of these metallic blocks, the sound will wake him up, and he'll invariably kill you. Sneak past him, and the next few levels are pretty standard, albeit some of the most difficult platforming challenges you'll face. Absolute mastery of Ogmo's movement, as well as a full understanding of all the game elements we've encountered so far, will be necessary to ascend the tower and confront the boss. He assures us we're too late before zapping Ogmo with a shock of lightning, disfiguring him badly. He powers up his army of new, actually functional Ogmobots, only to despair when the previous wave of Ogmobots that got thrown in the ocean earlier rise up and begin fighting back against the new models. In an act of desperation, he lunges at Ogmo, flying off the lab's roof, but only for Ogmo himself to be blasted away from the scene by a bolt of lightning. This is all just a giant intro to the fifth and final stage of the sector, which is a free-falling mid-air boss fight. You have to dodge debris and hazards as well as his crazy energy blasts, while intentionally knocking the blue energy blasts back at him. Hit him a few times and the next cutscene will trigger, showing our hero and the boss being split up. Ogmo is permanently discolored now, and while this is purely aesthetic and doesn't grant Ogmo any new abilities, yeah. You also see a major change to your color palette during the last leg of Celeste. I know people are going to call it a stretch, but even though the context is totally different, the trope still carries over from here to there, and it's interesting to note. The 10th and final sector, the Escape, takes place during a now raging war between the two Ogmobot armies. Fancy fire particle effects and scraps of falling debris litter the environment, and we even see a downed, friendly Ogmobot. Look at this face, and look at it well, as you're gonna need a healthy thirst for vengeance to power through what lies ahead. Trust me. The level of challenge may increase still, but we must prevail. In the second stage, we see a now imprisoned Ghostbot, and it turns out he's not so bad after all. Ogmo, being the forgiving chap that he is, frees him, and he decides to help us out. With his assistance, we can make it further through the war zone, eventually even encountering a few hostile enemy Ogmobots that fire bullets at us. You can kill them by jumping on their heads, or release this imprisoned friendly Ogmobot to act as bait so you can pass by. The poor soul. and the final stage of the game begins with a fiery gauntlet. And when you finally reach the top, you encounter the true final challenge, a face-off of the ages. It's you and Ghostbot versus not only the boss, but those two traitors, Princess and Upside as well. They'll jump around the stage like the knockoff Ogmos that they are, serving as an additional hazard along with the boss's attacks. But if you manage to hang in there and give the boss a taste of his own medicine, you've finally done it. The feeling of elation when the final cutscene triggers after this monumental struggle is indescribable. Ghostbot lets off a spirit bomb type blast on the boss, blowing everyone sky high. Ogmo hits the ground and the camera pans over to another Ogmo, but red, like Ogmo was pre-Lightning Zap, and the game just ends. I don't really get what the implication is here, or if this was supposed to be some kind of reveal that the actual Ogmo died and we were playing as a different Ogmo, or what, but it doesn't matter. Jumper 3 will ignore this ending for the most part, and outside of being pretty anticlimactic, it doesn't really detract from this game's status as an absolute masterpiece. I won't spoil any of the secret stages. I really do think you should go play this game yourself, but you definitely should revisit levels you've already beaten and collect gems you've missed. How else are you going to get to look at Ogmo Soda anytime you want? And pro tip, if you revisit a level where you already got the blue gem, a second red gem will appear in a new location for you to collect if you replay it again. Psst, it's kinda like golden strawberries, which, by the way, you also need to collect without dying, just like jumper gems. Just saying. On top of that, to unlock those secret stages, you're going to have to put in some work shaving down your completion times, which is aided by this sick timer that appears when replaying previously beaten levels. It even shows your current personal best, so you always know what time you're trying to beat. It's probably no surprise, but Jumper 2 stands as my personal favorite in the series. It retains the core simplicity and spirit of the first game, but simply becomes beefier and more replayable. Ogmo's moveset is expanded to its maximum potential, the cutscenes and goofy writing bring me back to days of childhood creativity and wonder, and it sports stone-cold genius precision platforming level design that I have rarely seen paralleled, even by big-budget professional studios. All of this, and it was released merely 4 months after the first game, June 18th, 2004. It's unbelievable. And what's perhaps even more unbelievable is that the game still freezes when the music loops. Game Maker! Look, it's a minor problem. And I couldn't find it anywhere, but I've been obsessed with Jumper for many years. And I swear I once read in an interview that Maddy said she intentionally didn't go back and fix this because speedrunners had gotten into the habit of using the freezes in the music as markers of their progress during speedruns. And yeah, Jumper speedruns are awesome, by the way. I'm not nearly skilled enough for this, but this video you're watching right now is probably longer than most of these runs. It's crazy. Oh, and on the subject of community content, this game also has a full-fledged level editor, and Jumper Editor 2 is blissful. Full sector creation, tweaking all of the values of the baseline physics and movement, customizable hint boxes, particle effects generators, the entire Jumper 2 sandbox of scenery and gameplay objects to mess around with, more skins, more customization, more everything. The first Jumper editor was impressive, but much like the improvement that happened between the first 2 core games, this second editor is outright bonkers. My dream is to live in a world where this game has enough of an active community that there's an endless stream of Jumper 2 sectors to play through, Mario Maker style. Please, Maddy Thorson, please, someone, Jumper collection on Switch with the editors included. For a game this good, I'm not above begging. But, of course, such a collection would also have to include the final game in the trilogy. So, let's finish this. Jumper 3 released a healthy 4 years later, on August 20th of 2008, and the game will immediately wow you with its beautiful presentation. The art has taken a quantum leap forward. The menu is flashy, and we're treated to an awesome shot of Ogmo flying through space in a fancy rocket ship. Upon starting a new game, we get a beautiful recap of the events of Jumper 1 and 2, and we learn that after the events of the second game, Ghostbot does Ogmo a solid and sends him into space in that rocket ship we saw earlier, which is programmed to find an ideal home for our hero. Ogmo drifts through space for 2,387 years, which is hilarious, and assuming that the first 2 games took place in 2004, that places us in the year 4,391. Just to be exact. A suitable planet is finally detected by the ship, so it abruptly crash lands into it, and with a glorious leap, our third adventure begins. Right away, things are different. Gone are the gems of old, replaced by 5 collectible coins. And there's a good chance you'll be left scratching your head right here during the first stage, because these coins up here, you just can't reach them. This is the game teaching you a valuable lesson. Ogmo can't do everything. The big conceit of Jumper 3 is that throughout the game, you'll unlock new color-coded transformations for Ogmo that fundamentally change his playstyle. Once you've unlocked a certain color for Ogmo, you can choose to play as any variation of him on any of the game's levels, incentivizing you to revisit previously cleared stages to clean up collectibles that were previously inaccessible to you. This blew my mind the first time I played this game. As you'll probably know from my affinity for Pikmin, cute, color-coded creatures with varying abilities scratch a weird imaginative itch in my brain. Thinking of all the different possible Ogmos there could be, it's really exciting stuff, and in Jumper 3's campaign, we get 5 Ogmos total. Of course, there's the classic Red, with his Jumper 2 moveset fully intact. But next, there's Green Ogmo, who loses the double jump, wall jumps, and skid jumps, but can instead shoot out a grappling limb of sorts to grapple onto ceilings and walls. He also moves more slowly than the standard Red, and overall, I gotta say, outside of this sick color scheme, Green Ogmo is kind of awkward to control. The concept of a grappling hook in this type of platformer would later be done better, ironically, in the sequel to the Pico 8 version of Celeste. There, the grappling ability is restricted to a horizontal shot, and while it's still a bit tricky at first, the limitations of the mechanic lend itself to way tighter level designs and intricate maneuvers that, once again, call back to the best moments of the Jumper games. Green Ogmo feels disjointed in comparison, but I'm not so sure it's his fault. Multiple Ogmos being freely available to play and complete any stage with complicates the task of designing levels that feel deliberate in a really profound way, but I'll touch on that problem more when we get through all the colors of Ogmo. After Green, there's Pink. Kinda confusing given Princess's role in the second game, but they are a slightly different shade, I guess. Pink Ogmo has a Princess Peach style mid-air hover that can cover significant horizontal distance, with the trade-off being a lack of a regular double jump. Getting a hang of the zippy momentum during the hover can be quite a handful. Next is probably my favorite, Blue Ogmo, or Teal Ogmo I guess. This one has a nerfed double jump and slippery physics, except when he's actually standing on ice, ironically. And his coolest trick is that he can create a little platform to ride. You can aim it left or right to start with, and then ascend or descend as it travels along horizontally. You can bail by jumping off at any time, and the platform will disappear on its own after a short time. This ability, to me, feels the most flexible out of any of the multicolored Ogmo abilities, and not having to lose out on having a double jump is a big bonus too. And finally, there's Yellow Ogmo, which is more or less Super Saiyan Ogmo. His double jump and skid jump make him invincible, allowing him to jump straight through otherwise deadly objects with a well-timed button press. I really like Yellow Ogmo, with the dash-like invincibility jumps being a genuinely interesting twist on Ogmo's core set of moves. Here's the problem though. How much fun can be extracted from any individual Ogmo variation is severely hampered by the fact that all of these stages are playable as any of them. While certain segments of levels are certainly catered to individual Ogmo movesets, with colored blocks even appearing in certain areas to gatekeep over-equipped Ogmo colors from certain sections, every level has to be at least doable by all the Ogmos, and this results in a set of levels that are drastically less focused than the ones in the previous 2 games. I get what Maddy was going for here, and there is fun to be had in revisiting levels, experimenting with traversing the same environment using multiple different playstyles, but the sacrifice is just too great. Not only does the level design itself suffer, but you never really get to settle into a state of zen-like muscle memory, a staple of precision platformers, because you're constantly switching between characters that control significantly differently from one another. It feels so disjointed in an otherwise razor-sharp series. I think the game would have benefited from having dedicated levels entirely centered around each of the Ogmo types, with layouts perfectly suited to their unique abilities. Maybe each sector of the game could have been a story of a separate Ogmo, with all of them attempting to reach a shared destination, and then the final sector could have been the story of once they'd all converged, with the newfound freedom to choose between them being a last leg reward for players who had made it that far. Containing the levels designed around multiple Ogmos to a small section of the game like this would have been preferable in my eyes, but hey, what do I know? The coins, if you do double back and find them, can be used at an in-game shop to buy hats. These are pretty funny and cute, and swapping between them on the fly is super easy, but ultimately they don't do anything. There's also medals you can earn by beating par times on each level, and the medals are what you'll need to unlock the secret stages, which, again, I'm not going to spoil here. There's no real story this time around, and it is sort of anticlimactic. Ogmo gets a happy ending having finally found his ideal home planet, and that's sort of it. You do also unlock an arcade mode for clearing all of the main stages, which requires you to play the game from the start in a single sitting, but with all of the Ogmos unlocked from the very start, including a 6th arcade mode only variant. Gray Ogmo can slow down time, but all of his jumps are absolutely pitiful, except for his skid jump, which is insane. He's more or less a joke character, but he's interesting nonetheless. Jumper 3 wouldn't get a dedicated level editor like the prior 2 entries, however, the delightfully named Ogmo editor would be released way later down the line by Maddy. It goes beyond just being a jumper level editor, instead acting as a way more open-ended and open source tool, a 2D level editor meant for use during the development of any 2D game. And what do you know? It was used by Maddy Thorson and Noel Berry in the creation of, you guessed it, Celeste. Boom. Speaking of Celeste itself, Ogmo does, thankfully, actually make an appearance in the most prominent spot in this room full of other Maddy Thorson adjacent characters. A rightful throne for a rightful king. And look, with this video, I'm not trying to take the shine away from Celeste itself either. It's a wonderful game, and the rightful successor to this little series that I love so much. The wall grabbing mechanic, as well as the directional dash, replacing Ogmo's fixed double jump, expanded upon the formula in just the right way, and the game's portrayal of self-doubt and, more importantly, ultimately striving to overcome it, no matter how unscalable the mountain may seem, is a profound piece of the puzzle that simply wasn't present in Jumper at all. I love Celeste. I love the original Pico 8 version of Celeste. I love the sequel to that version of Celeste. I love the unofficial Playdate port of Celeste. But my grander point in all of this is that game developers are artists, and Maddy Thorson is one of my favorites. And the same way we look back on the earlier works of painters and musicians to try to understand their later work through a more complete lens, we should look upon the earlier games of our favorite developers and trust that some of their genius was probably there the whole time. It definitely was. If I touched on all of Maddy's pre-Celeste works that are fun or interesting, this video would be unmanageable. More than it already is. So honing in on Jumper was kind of necessary. Plus, the lineage is the most direct. And Ogmo deserves a lot more than to be mistaken for Super Meat Boy for the rest of eternity. That's no shade to Super Meat Boy, by the way, which, let's be honest, was probably inspired by Jumper as well. I mean, Ogmo is an unlockable character in that game too. Awesome. And even they almost included the blue Ogmo from Jumper 3 to avoid the confusion, so I guess I can't be too annoyed by that whole phenomenon. But either way, the only point I'm trying to make in all this is that when these games are cataloged as all-time greats in the history of their genre, or honestly, the entire medium, these games deserve to be there right beside them. Go play them. They're free. Please. I'm Backseat Sakurai, and whether it's via golden arrows or green crystals, just keep on jumping, and I'll catch you later.
Or whatever, and it goes into the next one directly.
Yeah. What do you think a game like Jumper would be like if you made it today? I think it would be Celeste.